the key to harmony.
Good day and welcome back to Health Focus with Value Life Dietitians, your go-to space for health, wellness and everything in between. My name is Yolanda Dippenaar and I'm a registered dietitian with Value Life Centurion. Today we're talking about a topic that many parents face, and that is how to support your child with ADHD or sensory issues through your diet. Today, to help me with this topic, I have with me Marinelle. She is a colleague and fellow dietitian with a heart for children. Welcome, Marinelle.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start with meal times. Tell me, when you look at children with ADHD or sensory issues, what challenges do you see at meal times and challenges that is food related?
So often we have to look at the diagnosis, but the condition. Because it's not something that is an on or off switch. It's something that a parent or a mommy or a caregiver or a teacher would face on a daily basis. So often these children don't sit long for meal times. They have a short attention span. So with the toddlers, for example, you may find that they get up quickly, they don't finish or complete a meal, come back half an hour later, they're still hungry because they didn't eat enough when the meal was presented. Often they will have sensory issues. So some textures or some smells often will bother them. So they will avoid certain foods often that they don't want to eat. They may struggle with like a power struggle as well. So the mom can be quite challenged, like with this child, for example, not wanting to eat or having difficulty eating. Because it's not always their will. Maybe the children want to eat, but they're challenged with the sensory issues.
You're describing my middle child. That's why I'm laughing at this time. Because he will walk what I'm cooking on the stove, he will just walk by and say, I won't eat that. He just saw it and maybe smelled it, and I don't do that because he has sensory issues specifically in his mouth.
Yeah.
So I can really relate with that.
Yes. And often you find that the child wants to eat better. They sometimes are aware that they need to improve the diet, especially the older children, the adolescents. But they have difficulty working through these challenges. So in adolescence, for example, the child may have been diagnosed already, maybe on medications, and the medications can interfere with their appetite often. So we do find that they struggle to at school, for example, to take their snack box and eat. After school, before they play sports, they don't eat because they don't have that interoception of I'm feeling hunger. It is suppressed. Often with the older kids as well, they also have difficulty eating because the internal cues to feel the hunger is not there. So often with ADHD, we don't have that internal drive, motivation to eat because the outside world is so interesting, overwhelming. So then our internal cues are often suppressed. So they don't feel hunger. So we often find that they actually don't eat enough. You may find some kids have impulsivity issues as well. So that's also part of the diagnosis with this impulse control issues. So they may find themselves in a situation where they do resort to more junk foods, if I can call it that, but more unhealthy foods, snack foods, because they feel like that's something that's the same texture, smell, taste in every bite.
Okay, so that's the impulse that's I...
Yeah, and the difficulty working through it can be quite difficult, but then also impulsivity means that my friend is going to the tuck shop, for example, and then that cue to control, but say, but I have food, mommy packed me food, it can be suppressed. I want to have that pleasure of going to the tuck shop, for example, and having that easier food. Perhaps.
So if I listen to you, this is not only come to the dietitian and we're going to help you. It is a whole body thing. You have to work with the mind as well. Do you sometimes show these people or these children to other health professionals as well?
Yeah, so I do like to work with occupational therapists as well. Because what we find, I work with many adults as well with ADHD, and what we find is when your sensory load, for example, is very high, your tolerance to a difficult meal with many aspects in terms of sensory issues or sensory aspects like different colors, different tastes, different textures, for example, it may be overwhelming. And for those times, you may find that a patient, for example, or a person with ADHD might prefer like single foods, single ingredient foods. Some of them would resort to like a smoothie or a shake easy in that situation.
That old thing for my food mustn't touch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
So sometimes they like on single foods, I only want a packet of crisp, or I only want the chips,
Yeah.
or I only want the chicken nuggets, for example.
Yeah,
Right.
I was joking with a friend of mine and say that for a teen, she must take him to get burgers or something like that. And she said, no, you won't do that because it touches each other.
Yeah.
So that is a typical example.
Yeah, so the occupational therapist is quite important because they can help us identify and let the patient map out the sensory load in different aspects as well. So I remember this morning my daughter had winter clothes on, like primary school, and it spans, and the button is a little bit too tight on her, for example, and then the socks are touching her feet at a certain point, and then the sensory world is overwhelmed, and
Yes.
then like thinking about eating breakfast, for example, becomes something that she pushes ahead, okay, because that's something else that she needs to work with again then.
Okay.
So we often find occupational therapists can help us to map these sensory issues. So sometimes it can be other things as well, not just the mouth, but the outside world in
Yes.
terms of what you hear, what you smell, lights. So that's a very common one as well.
Okay.
Also like to work with a psychologist.
Of course, yes.
Yes, because this is a lifelong thing, and these children often need to go into like a high school, they need to go into tertiary education, or they need to go into a workspace, and you need many coping mechanisms. And if you start thinking or comparing yourself to other people, but I'm different, I can't multitask the same as other people, if I
Yes.
can put it like that. Or I have higher focus in certain areas, because many of these kids also have higher focus, but it means everything else is neglected. Yeah.
Okay. You've spoken about focus, so that is the golden question. What food are there or nutrients are there that you can offer or give an example for mommy to give to their children to help them with focus and basically just to be to help them
Long, yeah.
with that?
So I often find it, an internal struggle for me is we have to start in pregnancy already and educating moms actually, like, before you decide to have a baby, to correct your own nutrition. Because there's a pathway that when the mom that is hosting this baby has iron deficiency or vitamin D deficiencies, or has multiple gut issues, for example, that there's fetal programming or neural programming already happening. So we often find that when we read the studies about ADHD, they do find that there's certain brain areas, for example, or certain tissue would have lower iron levels.
Okay.
So, but that's when a micronutrient deficiency will, for example, have a very long latency. Yeah, so then it's not as simple as giving the child, for example, just a lot of iron-rich foods.
Yes.
Because if the gut is not healthy, for example, the absorption of the iron is affected.
Of course, yes.
If there is more lingering inflammation that the child experiences, the body don't absorb iron as well as it should be. So we have to think about the lifelong picture here and say, but we want to focus more on the prevention of ADHD, okay? So that we can say that when a mommy is having multiple pregnancies even, when there's maybe one child already identified, that she needs to be aware that we need to focus in utero already.
Yes.
When we've got young kids, toddlers, infants and so on, we have to identify iron deficiency quite early on and try to correct it, because the longer that lingers, for example, the neural pathways will actually have a long latency where this deficiency will have consequences later in life.
Yes.
Okay, so iron is a very, very big thing, but it's not as simple as just popping iron from the counters, we know that.
Yes.
So we need to focus on making sure that the deficiency is properly diagnosed, working with a pediatrician, for example, that can help us with the blood test and so on, and then looking at the diet as a whole and saying, but what is all the different sources of iron, and then what's the other foods that helps the absorption.
Yes.
But then we need
Like
to
what-
get to a child that's sensory, for example, and then we need to understand something about food manipulation. So sometimes the child will not eat the steak, for example, but will be happy with the mince.
Yes.
So that's an example of manipulation.
Okay.
But there's other nutrients. So vitamin D is quite important, but also from in utero until older. And then magnesium. So often we find that these kids don't choose magnesium-rich food, which will be like pulses, beans,
Yes.
nuts, seeds, leafy greens. So those
Yeah,
are
that's not
foods-
something that
No.
children eat. Yeah.
Yeah. So I often ask my patients, can we manipulate it in a way that we will accept the texture? We know
Yes.
it's green, but maybe when it's like hidden a little bit, you know
Yes.
it's there. We're not lying to you, but it's there.
Yes.
Can we hide it from you? Okay, and sometimes they agree to that.
Okay.
But that's a way of getting it in. Yeah, it's magnesium, iron, vitamin D, vitamin A, also the retinol especially, not the beta carotene. The retinol is quite important as well, but it's also quite important for the gut health.
Okay.
And in certain probiotics that you would ingest, so sometimes in your fermented foods, which
Yes.
may be avoided food as well, but the fermented foods often do contain strains that actually will have an impact on mood as well.
Yes.
What we know from omega-3s and iron and vitamin D is they have like a major effect as well on neurotransmitter production, but also the neurotransmitter uptake.
Okay.
So you can have it, but if your body doesn't take it up into the receptors, there's no use. If it
Okay.
can't be shuttled into a taxi, if I can put it like that, it's no use.
Yeah, so when you look at televiewers, neurotransmitters, what does that have to do with the
so
brain?
Dopamine, serotonin, so the happy feel things, but we often find that these neurotransmitters affect on your impulsivity as well, your reward systems. So, and these are pathways that's often a little bit skewed when we look at ADHD.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you look at ADHD child or maybe someone with sensory issues, a lot of time the child will cut out a whole food group. I don't eat fruits and veggies. I don't eat that. What is a practical way for mommy to introduce that to a child?
Yeah. So sometimes we have to accept that when we have a child that's not eating, they will be anxious about introducing new foods. And the mommy
Yes.
will have, I want to say it takes maybe years for that child to practice or to be exposed to different foods and to accept those foods. But in the meantime, there's this micronutrient deficiencies.
Yes.
It can be macronutrients in terms of carbs or proteins, often protein that's lacking, or essential fats like the fish fats often
Yes.
that's missing. So we want to understand that when a child has this gap between an adequate diet and where we want the child to be, that the child may need more support in terms of multivitamins.
Yes.
But not all vitamins are equal.
No.
And their flavors and their textures and things, we do
Okay.
find there's a great struggle with these products.
Okay, so the vitamins and minerals we're looking at more natural.
So there is good
Ones.
supplements that's been developed, that's in our local market, that's developed locally actually, that's specific for kids with autism, for example.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be just for a child with autism. So when there's a big gap, we can utilize these products, and if we struggle to get them in because they're in a powder form or something, I've resorted to asking mommies to put it like into a yogurt or putting it into like a jelly even, like
Okay.
having a jelly sweet every day, but
Yes.
this homemade type of recipe.
That's
Because
awesome.
the moment we get the micronutrients up, the body is able to make those neurotransmitters.
Yes.
Or to like have more stress tolerance to the world basically as well.
Yeah,
Or
go better.
Yeah, adaptability. And when we have that going, for example, we do find it's easier to incorporate the food. Okay. So sometimes we have to look at multivitamins and say, but not every child should be having this, but when we have a major gap between an adequate diet and where we are now, it may be very necessary.
Yes.
The same with omega-3s. My child doesn't eat fish, for example, but then if we can supplement with omega-3 or cod liver oil or something like that, just to bridge that gap.
Yeah, because sensory child won't even do the flax seeds as well because it's the
No.
texture is not right for them as well.
No.
Yes.
But in terms of flax seeds, for example, that it can be manipulated.
Again.
So we can use flaxseed oil in like a smoothie or in a cereal, for example.
Yes.
We can use it in a dipping sauce. Often the child doesn't even know it's in there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes. But it can be also in terms of flax seeds being grounded up and then being used, for example, in a oats. Or use it in like if the child eats millipap, for example, for breakfast, it can be used in that.
Okay.
And how we bake like crumpets and flapjacks and so on, we can manipulate the ingredients.
Yes.
So we can say we make a batter from like oats and banana and egg and put in the seeds in the ground form,
Yes.
in that form, or use the flaxseed oil. And then even if the child puts on a syrup, it's still there's good nutrients coming in at
Yes.
least. Yes.
So mommy has to be very creative. Can you maybe help mommy? How does a HDHD plate look like?
So it will differ from child to child. I had a conversation this morning with a fellow dietitian in Cape Town, and she was looking for ideas as well for a patient. And that child that she related to is eating like under 10 foods. So like expanding the plate to include like a variety of vegetables and fruits, different cheeses, even different meats, different starches, whole grains will not be possible. So sometimes we move very, very slowly, and we will take a nugget and just move to a chicken strip from a fillet, and we just season it with herbs or paprika, air fried still, to imitate the texture that the child prefers. Okay, but sometimes we move very, very slowly in that regard because it's difficult to just jump to a plate that includes different food groups for many of these patients. But if some of the children are willing to expand, and if they understand that we can manipulate the texture to meet them where they are. So if I prefer a chippy, for example, and they are willing to make a chippy out of not just a potato, but also sweet potatoes,
Yes.
or a butternut, or a carrot,
Yes.
or a zucchini, baby marrow, for
Yes.
example, and they accept it's more or less the same texture as the potato chippy, just the color changed,
Yes.
and the texture may be somewhat different with the other vegetables, but quite similar still. They do quite well in expanding their diet.
Okay.
And then there's the power struggles a bit less. Yeah. But if I ask the children often, do you have a story to tell me about where you had a bad experience with food?
Okay.
They would say they were at people's houses, for example, and they made potjiekos, and there was cabbage in the potjiekos.
Okay.
And all they remember is how it smelled, and they remembered like how soggy it was. And then if I showed them a picture of like cabbage, for example, that's baked into like a steak, for example, with some cheese over, okay, they would say, but maybe that would be more acceptable to me
Yes.
compared to the soggy cabbage.
Okay.
So sometimes we have to understand that these kids are visual as well.
Of course they are.
Yeah, and they don't want to be in that power struggle of you have to eat this now. It's presented now, and now I expect you to eat it. Sometimes sitting like in a different time of the day over a weekend and just looking at pictures, for example, and just saying, but what do you think you would enjoy, or what do you think is the struggle? Sometimes they don't know, so we have to guide them through it. It's like, what is the texture of that food? If it's cooked versus when it's raw. Can I change it when it's cooked, for example? Can I add a vinegar? Would you like something that's tang to us? Or would you add some salt to this? Would you add some cheese to this? Because sometimes I do like cheese, and that can be a vehicle to get them closer to the food, just adding some cheese.
Yes.
It may not be the most healthiest option, but I mean, in that struggle, it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah.
It's about
But-
having a healthy relationship with different foods.
The bigger picture, yes.
Yes, absolutely like that. So some children are easy to expand, they just need exposure. Exposure, exposure, exposure. And some kids you need to take it very, very slowly and say, but sure, you've got like many issues to work with. And sometimes just my biggest advice is actually to tell the mommy, you don't have a child with a picky eating disorder. Okay, take those words from the table completely. Don't hang that label around that child
Yes.
in every conversation and every social interaction. Because at every birthday party, there may be a hot dog, the child's got sensory issues, they didn't even eat a hot dog, and then they're being labeled in front of other people, but this one is picky and more
Yes.
sensory or ADHD. and these things are proclaimed all over.
There's a bigger social picture.
And then the child's living up to this expectation
Of course.
I don't have to eat it, she said so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have to look at that as well.
Yeah, so sometimes it's understanding the dynamics and the discipline around the table. So if someone's very forceful at the table or giving lectures about the health of the particular food, that child may experience it as like victimization. I know it's a very
course.
strong word,
But yeah, children can be strong in their opinions if they want to.
but that's the perception is you're
Yes.
forcing me now to eat this and I don't like it, so I will show you I'm not going to eat it.
Exactly.
Yes. Or they're feeling really frightful about that exposure and that interaction. And sometimes if we shift back a little bit and we put the healthier food or we put the different or the disliked food on the plate,
Ye-
the
Yes.
child may find that they are not that pushed because there's no expectation to eat it.
Yes,
But we have
it's on their plate, so the decision is still
Theirs.
theirs.
Yeah.
They are in control
Yeah.
of are they going to eat it or not.
Yeah.
And there is something on the plate that they will eat,
Yes.
but there's maybe, say it's pumpkin, there is pumpkin on there. Or maybe you put it every day in another form.
Yeah,
That
it
they
may be
can-
overwhelming on a daily basis.
Yeah, not every day, yes.
But now and again, putting it on the plate, and then if the child says, I'm not going to eat it, it's sometimes okay to say, but you don't have it, but it needs to stay on your plate, please.
Yes.
Yes. And then the conversation needs to end. The younger kids, we would ask the mommy or the caregiver or the daddy, whoever is at the mealtime. We hope for a full family often, but it's not
Yes.
often the case. We would ask the parent to then interact with the food. Can we change the shape of the food? Can we stack it? Can we roll it? I would sometimes go to can we spit it? Okay, because that's a positive interaction for the child and that's a taste exposure.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, but saying you need to chew and swallow, for example, can be like a gagging experience. It can be where the child has got this negative association and that's all they remember about the food. Like how someone forced me to eat this
Of
and I
course,
didn't
yeah.
like that.
Yes.
Yes. You just ask any 40-year-old adult male about pumpkin that don't eat it, for example. That's
Yeah.
the story usually.
Yeah, in the olden days, you have to sit
Yeah.
there until it's done.
Yeah.
Oh.
But now what we see is we have to understand that it can be something that's quite anxiety-provoking for a child. And I always say to the parents, like it's like swimming. You don't throw your child in the deep end when they need to start swimming, for example. You just first splash them.
Yes.
Okay. And then when
Yeah.
they're ready, they come to the pool, and when they are ready, they put their heads into the water.
Of course.
They do it naturally.
Mm.
Yes. And feeding is much the same. So sometimes we see these differences from like siblings even when they're ready to eat at a young age, and some kids will just go with any type of food. It's easy for them to sit for this 15 minutes at the meal time, and some kids are up and down and all over the show. So sometimes you have to understand if your child doesn't have a long, let's say, ability to sit for a meal for 15 or 20 minutes, for example, they may prefer to stand at the table. And that can be quite acceptable as well if they actually can complete a meal or eat a little bit more food and don't come back a little bit later and ask for more food.
Yes.
Yes, okay. I think sometimes we have to understand like this is a condition where the brain works quite differently and there needs to be some adaptation or a judgment in the family how we can accommodate these kids. My 8-year-old made a comment the other day. He said there's kids in the class that sit on balls
Yes.
opposed to chairs.
Yes, that's what they
Yes.
do with it,
Yeah.
for them to concentrate.
Yes.
So same with food.
So some children may need that same type of fidget chair, okay, maybe at the table.
Of course, yes.
Yes.
That will work wonderful.
Yes. And if it accommodates them to eat a little bit better, for example, it may be worthwhile. Sometimes if we listen to the kids in terms of like where their texture difficulty sits, okay, we can say, but let's accommodate that, but not always give them into their preference of always eating nuggets and chips and so on. But we can say, I hear that you want more crispy foods or that's your preference. But sometimes mommy wants a mushy food, like a mash.
Okay.
But let's go to the kitchen maybe and let's just see if I take a potato and I make it into a mash and a chickpea maybe in the same meal that we have like accommodated each other. But maybe I can put both on your plate that you can maybe just play with the mash while you eat your chickpea.
And another thing is if that child actually helps with that. If he helps
Exactly.
in the kitchen, then
Yeah.
that will be awesome. He will be more likely to eat,
Yeah,
or
because
she will be more likely to eat it.
I think a child with ADHD, for example, or ADD, often hears this criticism, I'm not the same as other children, I don't learn the same as other children. My marks are quite different than other kids, for example. I eat differently to them. So when they're in the kitchen, it can be a space where they it's a self-achievement type of
Okay, yeah.
item that you reach actually, that I have done this, therefore I will share, and therefore I will eat.
Okay.
Yeah. So sometimes they don't eat it. They've made it, but they don't eat it.
Yes, I know.
Yes.
I know that one.
But it brings them a step closer to being a confident young adult one day.
Of course.
Because those kids will also leave the nest at some point and they become like workers in our employment. They become like people we face in stores, for example. They are people that we have as family members as well. And when we understand like how they operate, it's a little bit different than us. Okay, or it may be even us, because some of us also have these
Yes, of course.
type of things, like how we function as adults as well. Then we understand them a little bit better.
Yes, but different isn't always bad. So
No.
they should, from small, know that different is a good thing.
And
to
maybe
be.
a superpower that you have.
There you go.
Yes. Yeah. But we need to always go back to the fact that we need nutrition. In terms of like looking at like how these kids behave at school, how they concentrate, like blood sugar regulation is quite important. So sometimes they are not aware that they become hungry. They're not aware that they need to feed or to refuel again. So sometimes they would need like guidance from the occupational therapist about time schedules with meals, having good routines, predictability. Like an adult in their life, for example, will guide them, but sometimes when they practice these things over and over, they become self-aware
Yes.
that I need to drink water, I need to hydrate, because often they don't drink water even.
Yes.
Enough of that. But like practicing these things are quite important, and the conversation in the kitchen, maybe in the shop when we're buying these foods, let you choose something for us to eat tonight. But the criteria is it must be orange.
Okay.
Okay. Not sweets, obviously. We have to guide them to maybe more appropriate foods.
Yes.
Okay, and maybe the sweet can be a reward, not a reward, maybe a reward is the wrong thing actually.
Yes.
I would correct myself there. But maybe it's something that we can say we have afterwards or before the meal even, because they have to understand that I don't have to complete a meal, for example, to earn something.
Yes.
Yeah, but we can guide these young people, eventually they become adults, into better relationships with food. But the blood sugar regulation is quite an important thing, and having like meals more frequently, perhaps not fasting too long, not falling into the, let's say, in the booby traps of everyone needs to be fasting to do better.
Yeah.
These types of children, for example, or young adults, not supposed to be doing that if it makes them perform worse.
Yes, and maybe they become irritated, and then if you're irritated, you really won't eat that thing that you try to eat or try to incorporate.
You won't even remember to eat, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's quite an interesting field, and there's often anxiety and depression that's overlapping with ADHD as well. And I think we have to acknowledge that these like psychiatric conditions that needs proper management with food as well. Okay, because there's a big association between malnutrition or micronutrient deficiencies, where we don't have these correct nutrients in our body, and inabilities to tolerate the world.
Marinelle, that was incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your passion and sharing your knowledge with us. For the parents watching, remember, it is not about being perfect. It's about creating a safe space for your child and consistently helping him or her with nourishment of their brain, nourishment of their body. We'll see you next time on Health Focus. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Until then, remember, have fun in the kitchen with your child.